Hello, and welcome to the Crack Pits build video. We will begin by taking everything out of the box. After you've taken everything out of the box, you can begin flexing all the control surfaces on the airplane. After you've played with them for a good bit, you can fold them back on themselves and place some weight. What this will do is just break them in and make them easier to move. You can now locate your wooden spars and figure out where each one goes. After you've located where each spar goes, you can begin cutting out any extra foam that keeps the spar from going into place. There will be some on the fuselage you need to cut out, and also some on the upper and lower wing. If any of your spars have a jagged edge, just use some sandpaper to clean them up. Now finish cutting the slot for the wooden control horns and the ailerons. You can now apply a bead of welders to all your spars and fit them into place. Now that you've glued everything into place, it's a good idea to apply some weight to ensure everything dries nicely together. Go ahead and glue on your canopy. Apply a bead of welders to the canopy, and then mesh it up, and make sure glue gets on both surfaces, and then pull it off, and then let it tack up. After you've let your canopy tack up for about 5 minutes, you can glue it into place. Start by lining up the front seam of the canopy and then roll it back. You can now glue on your horizontal stabilizer to the butt of your fuselage. Apply welders to both surfaces and then let it tack up for a few minutes, and then glue it into place. Now that we're waiting for our glue to dry, we can set up our electronics. Plug everything in and make sure everything is fully functional. When the servos are manufactured, there's some oil applied to them, so go ahead and wipe it off and make sure everything is nice and dry. You can now open up your goodie bag of parts and dump it into a bowl or something of that nature. Make sure you don't lose any of your small pieces. Go ahead and punch everything out. Once you have everything punched out, you can find your differential arm and go ahead and drill the holes out where we're going to be screwing it into our horns. Do the same thing with the elevator and rudder extension arms. We are doing this so the wood will not crack or split when we screw it into place. Use the most appropriate size drill bit you have for the job. You can now locate your servo arms and your extra screws that come in the baggies. You can go ahead and trim off a little bit on the aileron control horn if you'd like to do so. You can also pre-drill the holes in the plastic horns if you'd like to do so. Screw your differential arm into place. Then cut off any extra screw that sticks through the backside. After you have it screwed into place, I like to apply some medium CA to give it a little bit of extra strength. Now do the same process with your elevator and rudder extension arms. You should end up with something that looks like this. You can now locate your aileron control horns, and also your keepers and clips. Go ahead and apply your keepers to your elevator and rudder extension arm. It works best to put these clips on using your fingers. If you use a tool, you'll end up shooting it across the room. You can now apply a keeper to each aileron control horn. Make sure that you have an opposite set of aileron control horns. You can now glue your aileron control horns into place. When you pull the aileron up, the aileron control horn should fit perfectly in the crease of the wing. Goober it up with some welders and push it into the slot. Wipe away any excess glue. Leaving the elevator intact, split the rest of the horizontal portion of the fuselage in half. Now locate your horns for your aileron linkages. You can use an X-Acto knife to make the holes a little bit bigger so that Z-bends are easy to fit in. Now finish cutting the slots for your horns so we can glue them into place. Apply some welder's glue to your horns and then glue them into place. You can now attach your aileron differential arm to the 9-gram servo. Make sure that the aileron differential arm is facing forward. This is crucial to the throws of your ailerons. You can now glue your 9-gram servo to the bottom portion of the fuselage. Now apply welder's glue to the bottom wing. Also glue in your brackets. You can determine your bracket location because depending on where you put it, it'll get more or less coverage on the spars. Play with them a little bit and you can figure out where they go. Now glue your vertical portion of your fuselage into the bottom wing. What I like to do is flip it over and tack the joint with some CA to make sure the wing dries perfectly into place. You can now glue your 5-gram servo into the horizontal portion of your fuselage. Cut off a little bit of the tab so the servo wire will have enough room to come back through the other side. Now glue your last 5-gram servo into the vertical portion of your fuselage. Now rough up the ends of each one of your control rods using some sandpaper. We're doing this to preparate it for gluing on the Z-bend. Also rough up your Z-bends. Now that you're ready to glue one Z-bend onto the end of each control rod, you can put the Z-bend in a vise, tack it with some CA, and hit it with some kicker. You can now coat it with a little bit more CA, and then apply your heat shrink tubing and shrink it on. Apply one Z-bend to the end of each push rod. On your medium length push rods, at a later time, you will need to attach a Z-bend to both of them. Go ahead and rough them up with some sandpaper. Center your aileron servo and install your push rods. Use some blue Loctite on the keeper. When tightening down the set screw, be sure not to tighten it too tight. You do not want to crush the rod. Go ahead and apply a bead of welders to all the hinges on all of your control surfaces. This will give it a little bit of extra strength. Apply welders to the horizontal portion of your fuselage and then slide it into place. After you have it in place, wipe away any excess glue. Double check and make sure everything's square. You can generally use your eye for checking for squareness. If you want to use a tool, you can do so, but it's generally more effective to look down and bend it back and forth a little bit and make sure it looks right. You can now apply a bead of welders to your rudder, let it tack up, and then glue it into place. Before we glue our rudder into place, we will cut out the slots for the elevator and rudder control arms and glue them into place as well. Now that you have your horns glued into place, your welders is now tacked up. Go ahead and glue your rudder into place. This is a little bit awkward of a job, so just go ahead and apply some pressure the best you can, and you'll get it into place just fine. You can now apply some welders to the motor mount, press it all up together, and then pull it apart and let it tack up. While we're waiting for the motor mount to tack up, we'll install the biplane struts using some welder's glue. The foam has to go around the spar and the wing, so make sure it seeds in just right. After you're done with that, you can go back to your motor mount and press it firmly into place. You can now apply welder's glue to your upper wing. Make sure you glue your brackets in as well. Now flip your plane over and glue your upper wing into place. Now flip it right side up and check to make sure everything in the top is perfectly seated into place. You'll need to pay attention to your wooden brackets and make sure they're perfectly pulled in and touching the wooden spar through the middle of the fuselage. This is the most tricky part of the build. Use something with a flat edge to tape your upper ailerons into place. You will need to put your Z-bend in your horn on your upper ailerons. You can now pull up your carbon fiber rod, hold it next to your Z-bend, and CA it into place. This is very, very tricky. After you have them both tacked into place and you're happy with the location of your ailerons compared to each other, you can go ahead and coat it with some more CA and hit it with some kicker. Also, slide up your heat shrink tubings and heat shrink them into place. You can now screw your motor into place. Pay attention to where your motor wires go. I like to put my ESC on the opposite side of my receiver. Just make sure you know where you want to put it. Go ahead and cut a slot for your JST connector to bring it through to the top of your fuselage, so it can be later connected to your battery. And also cut a slot in the fuselage to bring your servo wire around to the other side, so it can be connected up to the receiver. Now hot glue your ESC into place. Go ahead and hot glue your aileron wire up the side of your fuselage. Go ahead and plug in your receiver and figure out where you want to put all your wires. Locate your angular brace and determine where your receiver should be placed. Then hot glue it into place. If you'd like to do so, you can tack down your other wires. I found it makes it easier when installing your angular brace. Before gluing our angular brace into place, we will trim off the very tip of it to make the servo wires come through a little bit easier. Now apply welders to your angular brace and press it into place. While we're waiting for our angular braces to set up, we'll do the last step on the motor. Back out the screws and put a drop of CA on them, and then turn them in about 1.5 turns. What this does is gives the screw a little bit more length to it, so when you use the bigger prop rubber bands, your rubber bands won't be popping off. After you have them in place, go ahead and wipe off any excess glue and then hit it with some kicker. You could try using red Loctite, but I found it just does not cut it. Just use CA. You can now go ahead and apply your prop and prop rubber band. You can now apply 6 eyelets or push rod guides to each of your push rods. Go ahead and center your elevator and rudder servo and screw your servo arm into place. Just pull aside the foam when screwing it into place. Go ahead and put your Z-bend through the horn on your elevator. and put the front of the push rod through the keeper. Now place the push rod guides into the pre-cut holes in the fuselage. After you have them all in place, glue them in with some CA. Make sure you use some medium CA. If you use thin CA, it'll wick up and more than likely glue your push rod into place. After you have done that, go ahead and apply some blue Loctite to your keeper and screw it into place. Be very careful not to crush your push rod. Get it just tight enough so that your push rod will not slip. Do the same thing to the elevator and rudder. After you've done that, check them for their movements. You're now ready to cut the slot for the battery. The battery should go right in front of the wooden spar that's in the middle of the fuselage. Cut out a slot slightly smaller than the size of your battery that you're going to be using. Your battery should fit snugly into place. You can now apply your 4 side force generators. Just use some welder's glue and wipe away any excess welder's glue when you're done.